At this stage, I want to bring in the third of our Zoom speakers, who is Rohit Talwar. Rohit is the founder and CEO of Fast Futures. He is a person who used to be almost permanently on the aeroplane, it seemed to me, traveling around the world, offering advice to clients of all sorts in different parts of the planet. He is the author and co-editor of no less than 7 books, large books in fact, on future possibilities, with multiple viewpoints in them. And Rohit's great talent, in my observation, is he can synthesize all these different insights into a memorable collection of views. So, Rohit, over to you.
Thank you, Jose, for having me at this event. Can I just check that you can hear me okay?
Hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. So just to set this in context, what do? I'm a futurist. I spend my time doing 3 core things. One is researching the future and creating events to share that content. The second is advising organizations, whether that's helping them with horizon scanning and scenario planning, developing their foresight function, training people in foresight, and mentoring leaders in how to lead like a futurist. And then the third thing we do, as David mentioned, is we publish books about the future. And the 2 most recent ones are the ones you see on the screen under the theme of aftershocks and opportunities. We have 60 contributors from around the world who've shared their views about how our world might progress in the next decade. We had 25 published in June of last year, and another 37. We just brought the book out on the 28th of September. And both David Wood and José Cordeiro have contributed excellent chapters to each of those books. And so we've really brought together an incredible array of contributors from Spain, from Argentina, from Mexico, from Kenya, from the UAE, Egypt, Australia, and obviously US, UK, but it's really a set of global perspectives. And what I'm going to do in the time I have is just to distill a few of the key messages coming out of that, really around what are some of those factors that could shape the next decade. I don't want to do predictions. I just want to share some thoughts about what it is that might have a bearing. And really what you've already heard over the last 2 days is there's a set of factors coming together, not just technology and science, but social change, political change, a rising consciousness that are going to shape a level of innovation in the next decade that could well exceed any decade of innovation that we've seen in history. And I just want to talk about these 4 domains, the world in which we operate, how technology and the new economy are becoming one, the nature of business. I spend a lot of my time with business. I want to talk a little bit about that. And then finally, to think about how do organizations and people prepare themselves for this. So if we think about the operating environment, I think there are 3 broad scenarios that could characterize the next 5 to 10 years. The first is really around a scenario where we never fully recover. The pandemic keeps evolving in different ways. We get new shocks, whether that's economic shocks, technology impacting the level of jobs in society, unexpected and unpleasant outcomes from science research, conflict between nations, and really this sense of the next decade being quite a tough one, but the core of it being the breakdown that then leads to breakthroughs on the other side. The second one is where many people think we are now, where we feel like we're making some progress. We're starting to see how we could get the entire planet vaccinated, those who want it, and how we could maybe get cures, how economies in certain parts of the world are starting to recover, how we're greening the agenda more, and how we're creating potentially the next technology-enabled wave of change and transformation, hopefully for the good. And then the third one is this idea of kind of a return to the roaring 20s, in the same way as the 1920s started with a massive explosion of innovation, new industries, new ideas, this feeling that all of this science and technology, 3 trillion plus, I'm told, of investment around the world, really starting to pay off in changing society, creating abundance and creating new pathways to the future, that we've heard many people talking about, but really starting to lay those foundations and creating that effective conversation between society, governments, businesses, NGOs, and the innovators to say, how do we bring these together to create sustainable futures for ourselves? But what we know is that there are some challenges. One is we're seeing the level of conflict at the political level, at the technology investment level, just rising. If we look, China alone is investing over $430 billion in AI. And what we're seeing is more and more battlegrounds. We're seeing the One Belt, One Road initiative that China's creating, touching up to 150 countries. Again, something like a $7 trillion investment that's effectively creating a world within a world. And this is starting to force choices for people and for organizations where we could see big corporations just being forced to split up or choose sides and decide that they have to base themselves in the China-centric world or in a Western world, but they can't do both because there's just too much cognitive dissonance trying to manage across two different cultures and political philosophies, legal systems, economic systems, just different ways of being that may be too much for one leadership to handle. We also know that the pandemic has devastated economies, it's challenged a lot of businesses. And I think the next decade is going to see us coming up with radically new ideas about how we fund ourselves. We've seen a number of countries create a revenue stream by offering e-residency like Estonia. You don't live there, but you pay for residencies. Others selling residency. Others starting to say, we're going to create charging mechanisms around your sustainability footprint. So if you don't meet our targets around water consumption, around energy generation at the point of consumption and around emissions and other factors, we'll charge you for them. So we'll start to create multiple revenue streams that are taxation effectively, but not called that because there's a general trend towards lower taxation. For businesses, we've seen a lot of innovation, but one of the ideas that I think is really starting to take hold is a subscription model for our services or a pay-for-usage model. If I want to use aircraft engines today, I don't pay for them. I pay for every hour they're in flight. But also the crypto economy has introduced this idea of being able to buy a tiny level of a fraction of a coin. So you can buy 1/quintillionth of a Bitcoin. It's called a Satoshi. It's down to 18 decimal places. And what the technology allows us to do that is to trade in that way. Most businesses haven't worked out the idea of how they would do that. But once they start to see that they can deliver services and charge a tiny fraction of a cent or a euro for their services, we start to see some radically new ideas about how we bring products and services to market. We also know that we're in this really interesting point around sustainability. A lot of organizations are beginning to wake up to the fact that what they're measuring they might have positive measures, but they're not necessarily delivering some benefits to the planet. A classic example is carbon offsets, where a lot rely on rainforests to absorb the carbon. And now we're seeing the Amazon and other rainforests actually emitting more carbon than they absorb. So we're going to see this shift, I think, towards real focus on true impact and visibility. And that's where things like blockchain are going to help because we can monitor, we can measure, and you can't edit the data. But I think what I see from working with clients is they also know that by the middle of this decade, we'll have a real sense of whether we're on course for net zero emissions, net zero waste, i.e. the reuse of all our waste, and net zero energy consumption because we're generating it all at the point of consumption. We'll know by 25, 26 whether we're doing that or not. And then the question becomes, well, if we're not getting there, what do we do? How do we adapt to a world where we know we're not going to hit this? And do we acknowledge it, or will we have some superhuman effort to then try and make it happen? We're also in a world where everyone is trying to work out, well, this story of society is changing so radically. You look at the US and what Bill just said, there isn't one society there. Everyone's trying to work out their place in that world. And we heard earlier about the metaverse, and it starts to create some very interesting questions where people exist in a metaverse. How does that fit within our concepts of society? When I can do anything, be anything, look like anything I want every single minute of every day, and I can change that, how do I fit within broader concepts of society? What does that mean for voting? What does that mean for my civil rights? What does that mean in terms of how I pay taxes? All of those stories are going to get challenged, and how we create a collective story, I think, is really going to be one of the most interesting challenges of the decade ahead. Another is what happens to the law. Right now, the legal system is very complex. Countries are trying to reduce the cost of the justice system. And there's a gradual acceptance that we have to encode the law in software to make it easier to administer, but also easier to handle cases. So we're already seeing this. Estonia now has a legal dispute resolution system for small claims between people and businesses and people and people. Anything under 7,000 euros can be resolved entirely in an automated way. China's internet courts are operating 24/7. Resolving disputes in the digital domain. 98% of them go through without any appeal. Some are tested by humans, but we're starting to see this gradual evolution to a software embedded law and a legal system rewritten for software. So the second key area I want to just talk a little bit about is how technology is shaping the new economy. And what we know is that most of the time, our ambitions with technology don't quite get fulfilled, not because of the technology, but because of complexity. If you look at the 60 to 80% of digital transformation efforts that fail, it's not because the technology isn't good enough. It's not because we can't build the right solutions. It's because of the culture and complexity of our organizations. The same with society. Trying to bring in more automated service delivery is a challenge when you've got complex organizations in the civil service and complex society. So one of our big challenges is going to be how we overcome that. Can technology help us overcome those things? Or are we going to see this challenge that we face today, where for all the investment in technology, we've seen almost zero impact on productivity? Now that masks massive growth in productivity for the tech vendors, but almost negative growth in productivity for a lot of businesses trying to adopt that technology. And we're going to see a lot of science and tech coming. We've heard a lot about it. And what I think is really interesting is how the science and tech innovations are really blurring those boundaries we have between what the physical is, what can we consider human, what we consider the boundaries of time, and what could happen when. The last 18 months has seen the acceleration of so many things that we thought were 5 to 10 years away, whether it was around pharmaceutical research, whether it was around adoption of the internet or working from home. All of them have been accelerated in ways that no one could have imagined. And then we're also seeing that blurring between what's real and what was sci-fi. And we've had a number of people referencing science fiction authors over the last 2 days. So where are we now? Well, right now, we see that already we have incredible advances shaping our world through information technology, AI and the cognitive sciences, the biological sciences, and the kind of the physical environment. And then over the next 10 years, what else comes in? Well, it's applying these things to take those further, but also really transform human health, the whole human enhancement piece we've been talking about, a new kind of architecture for how we build things, material which has memory, which can shapeshift, and every single domain of society being touched by these technologies. And a number of people, again, have talked about how we need to wake up and accelerate our understanding of these things and their implications, because whilst the innovations are moving at exponential pace, our understanding isn't, and our capacity to leverage them for human benefit isn't yet there. And then we have to think about, well, who are the players here? And we've already heard about how the big tech players tend to redefine concepts. The innovators come up with the ideas around the metaverse, but the big players put their own brand on it. And what we see is 6 of the 7 biggest companies on the planet are tech players. They together are worth around $9 trillion, which makes them 9 to 10% of the entire global equity market. And to put that in context, if you added together all these companies, they're still not as valuable as those big 6. And so these are starting, we know they're bigger than some countries in their turnover. Apple alone is worth over 2 trillion, Amazon too, Microsoft on a good day. And so the power of these companies is incredible. And it's how they behave that I think is going to be really interesting, and how we manage that, how we accommodate them, how we regulate them, are going to be some of our biggest defining challenges. And then we've heard a lot about AI. And I think the challenge here is going to be about having society understand it. So Finland has its elements of AI, online learning, tutorials. But the challenge now is around how do we help society understand the roles technology can play in our lives, in our businesses, in the delivery of government services, in management of the environment, and raise understanding enough so we can have meaningful discussions about what we want and how we regulate things, with lots of conversation about ethics, but almost no application of that ethics as I look around the world in what's being done. And where countries are seeing AI as a key lever for global dominance, to what extent are they going to buy into a global ethic? The next area that I think is really important reshaping the economy is obviously, firstly, blockchain. For the last few years, we've heard businesses in particular say we can't see anything that you could do with a blockchain that you can't do with existing systems. But now we're seeing a growing waking up to the idea that there are three things people want going forward. They want absolute security, they want total transparency, and they don't like the idea of censorship, someone going back and changing the data, which is leading everyone to say, well, actually, the only way we could do that is through a distributed ledger, which is immutable. Now, the power isn't yet there to scale up, but we'll see that coming. The most visible application of this today is the crypto economy, worth about $2.2 trillion just before I came on. We know that Bitcoin was the first coin to hit the market in 2009. It's been the best performing financial asset over any 10-year period in history. And we have over 8,000 crypto assets out there now. We're starting to see very different types of assets and different views emerging. So we're starting to see businesses say, actually, we could create our own crypto token and have everyone who trades with us operate within a Disney coin ecosystem, for example. And then we start to bring other people in to provide services to those players. And we suddenly start to create some very interesting models about how we move forward. And as I mentioned, we can people are issuing coins where you can buy them down to 1/quintillionth of a cent. What that means is that almost anyone can participate in this economy. And whether I'm just buying tokens or I'm investing in decentralized finance, suddenly I'm allowed to participate in those offerings that have 8, 10, 100% interest, because they're no longer the domain of the wealthy and the big institutions. Anyone can participate. And in most cases, the applications have zero employees, so they have almost zero technology costs. They're decentralized autonomous organizations that exist entirely in software. The token holders govern them. And we're starting to see this spread into the, if you like, the mainstream. So what we saw on September the 7th was El Salvador adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. Many other countries like the Ukraine, Paraguay, and others moving to that in order to break the dominance of the currency they've tended to be tied to, like the dollar, but also to break the political influence and to give their citizens some new options. The president of El Salvador is tweeting every day, has been on TV teaching people how to download a digital wallet, how to use their cryptos. They've been given $30 of cryptos each. And then we've seen the rise of central bank digital currencies. China was the first to really launch one in any major scale, 20 million people on the trial of the digital yuan. Most countries looking at how they're going to do something with it. Three models emerging. One is we create our own CBDC tied to our native currency. The second is we become part of someone's ecosystem. So I talked about the Belt and Road. What we could see is China encouraging those countries to adopt the digital yuan as their digital currency. And the third is we adopt what's called a stable coin. So there are already coins out there that are effectively tied to the dollar. And a lot of people are saying countries will do that. So, and the challenge now is how we rethink the way we do business, the way we trade, the way we're allowed to access financial services in a digital world. And the interesting thing there is we're starting to add intelligence to money. Today, if I have €1 in a bank account, that €1 doesn't know it's mine. The bank knows I have €1, but the euro is dumb. But as we start to add intelligence, that euro could spend its entire day looking around for where is the best interest rate for me and moving itself if there are no transaction charges and continuously moving around to create the best return. If you're a financial institution, this is the ultimate definition of a nightmare, because you don't know what assets you've got at any one moment, and you have no idea what you can lend out on a longer term basis. But we're moving to smart money and all the possibilities it creates. The other thing that's coming up, and as I talked about, we're fractionalizing digital tokens. But once we start to tokenize and fractionalize everything, why couldn't I buy 1/10,000th of an Amazon share? Why couldn't I tokenize my house? And we're already seeing this happening in real estate, where my house might be 100,000 euros. I issue 10 million tokens for that house. And you can do the maths as to what fraction of a cent that is. I might buy 20% with my cash, 20% with a mortgage, but the other 60% is open for people to buy tokens in. They can then trade those tokens as the value of the house goes up. They don't have to wait for me to sell things. What this creates is an incredible array of possibilities as you start to tokenize everything and fractionalize everything. Even production equipment can become its own business and has a revenue stream which it shares with its token holders. We're seeing radical ideas, and I mentioned decentralized autonomous organizations. They're hitting the mainstream. So this is an autonomous DAO insurance company that has no employees. The token holders vote for any changes required. And they work in small pools to determine whether someone's claim is valid or not. Very different models for how we operate. All of this is starting to shape a new thinking around business. People being challenged to say, well, you've got very complex propositions. Is that the right way forward? Does management have the bandwidth to really understand and manage that? And is what we're creating a sustainable operating model? Where I live, there are 6 financial institutions on the high street within 2 minutes of each other. The common thing is almost all of them are empty almost all of the time, and they're all loss-making. So the question becomes, what is the right model for us? And that leads us into this thinking about, well, what is our future? What is the overall structure and model for us? And the rise of this idea of designed for digital and corporation zero. We're seeing a lot of born digital companies that are basically starting with a digital design for their business. Now we're seeing a lot of companies saying, actually, our organization is so complex, we just can't overlay technology on it and create a model that competes with the new entrants, or a model that's efficient, or that delivers a return on that tech investment. So should we start with a clean sheet of paper, a corporation zero model, where we start with the outputs we're trying to generate, the information we need to provide to all stakeholders, and then a digital simulation of how our business is going to work, and then work out what the physical elements are going to be, the people, the buildings, the components of machinery, etc. Where the key is, what information do they provide back to the model to see how we're doing? Radically different thinking, but we're starting to see these ideas come in. Then the question raised that we touched on a little bit, but how are we going to support people when they lose jobs to inevitable automation and have to reskill to work in the new industries coming through? The guaranteed basic incomes, the transitional basic incomes. How will we work out the responsibility of government, citizens, and organizations in funding these things? And we're going to experiment with a lot of different models. Finally, if we look at people and organizations, what we know is that the kind of technology impact is changing the nature of work. If we're automating a lot of roles, then what kind of work will people want to do, and how will we define the new roles? How do we talk about workplace when half of it is at home and half is in some sort of central building? What does the culture look like going forward when most people aren't in the office most of the time, and many recruits may never meet their colleagues physically? And then how do we create the right kind of engagement, and what role then could things like collective intelligence play in helping us gain that bigger perspective of what people think and how they view the future? This takes us into a challenge around how we build the resilience of our people, get them to take responsibility for their own learning and their own capacity to navigate an uncertain future. And finally, a really much bigger conversation about how we get rewarded. Today, in the UK, more people under 25 have cryptocurrencies than have a pension or savings in a conventional business bank account. And when those people are starting to ask to be paid in crypto, that starts to take a very different model on as to how organizations support talent in the way the talent wants to be supported. It also starts to raise questions of what kind of role do leaders play And how do we develop those future-focused leaders who are capable of managing the organization from the future back and the outside in? And how do they build that stakeholder engagement internally to say, we don't know the full answer, but we're going to work together to navigate our way through? So what I've tried to do in this short presentation is just pull together a number of the different themes coming from these books, a number of the different ideas. But the kind of cornerstone of this is that most of our organizations knew how to do a particular dance. We knew how to deal with a competitor entering the market, a suddenly change in consumer demand or customer demand, new regulation, price competition, pieces of technology innovation. But now all of that is happening at the same time, and we're having to learn very new dance routines. And we're having to get used to the idea of looking uncomfortable as we learn those routines. But we're never going to learn those routines sitting on the sidelines and writing stories about how you might dance. The only way we can do it is to get in there, start learning how to dance, tripping over our own feet, embarrassing ourselves until we start to find some workable routines. But what we know is the music is going to change quite quickly. And so we have to learn how to learn to dance faster, to adapt faster, or to slow things down because we have a different view about how we're going to navigate the future. So I hope that's made sense. Just a little gift to the audience. We've agreed, because Jose is a contributor, we are offering a 25% discount, Jose and David. We're offering a 25% discount on any of the books on our website. Just go to the website and use that coupon code, and you can access any of the books on our website for 25% off in electronic or print format. I hope that's made some sense. I hope it's given you some food for thought, and I'm going to hand back to David now for whatever happens next. David. I see Jose clapping.
What's happening next? What's happening next is we're going to all be learning new dance routines, exactly as you said. We'll have time just for maybe a couple of very quick questions because we're up against the schedule. I'll just point out that after these questions, this session will be moving into a different mode because we're going to be having a presentation physically here in the room by a very inspiring and energetic speaker. So we will be dancing differently in a few minutes, but let's just dig in briefly, if we can, Rohit, to a couple of aspects. So I'm going to ask quickly a question, then I'll give Bill a chance to ask, and then I'll give Eric a chance to ask, but let's all be brief.
Well, my thoughts are that I think Rohit has done a marvelous job of showing the complexity of the world that's evolving right now. He's exactly right. These are all accurate trends. They're unprecedented levels of complexity. It's going to take some real thoughtful work to survive this. That's absolutely true. Thank you, Rohit. Very nicely done.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here too. Thank you, Rohit. It was a pleasure listening to you, and I agree very much on the complexity, and you were able to, show a lot of that complexity. It's one thing that I just, if you have time, just elaborate a bit more on that is the idea about the new collectiveness. Because if you see the world now is, it's staring down in different stories around and nationalities and so on and so forth. So, but it's very less effort to think through what could that mean for the collective, the collectivity.
So my take on it is that right now we're starting to form collectives. We're creating communities in social media, within society, but they're still largely governed. So it's Facebook or whoever that determines what we can do and censors us. The next stage, I think, is when we start to allow everyone to be part of the governance, so that when I own a Facebook share, that doesn't just give me the right to vote on what the Facebook determines I'm allowed to vote on, but I can actually table motions, and that everyone who's a token holder in Facebook can be part of the governance. And the governance of any organization And I think you start to take that into things like government itself. When we start to use distributed autonomous organizations in governance and government, and we bring in collective intelligence tools to create those open dialogues, I think we move to some very interesting models of the collective. Now, none of them are going to be right in terms of what we predict today, but I think through those experiments, we might get to some interesting models that help us through the kind of transitions we're going to go through over the next decade.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Another observation, if I could make a comment. I was struck, Rohit, by the point about collective intelligence. I think that's exactly right. In a world that is virtual to a large extent, people are not going to be living in offices the way they did at one time, and very complex. I think we are moving towards a form of collective intelligence where organizations use good software systems that collect the judgments of a variety of people to get a better understanding of tough problems and evaluate options. The retailers are doing it now. They all ask what you thought about various products. So they're collecting collective intelligence on their products. So I think that's exactly right. We're going to see more of this. It's going to become, I think, a fairly common way of better understanding complexity and acting on it.
Absolutely. You know, in the past, people got used to doing, or a small group of people got used to doing things like open space events where you could hear everyone's views, or the Axelrod conference model, and there were a variety of them. Now we're seeing that being replicated in technology. So we can have very open dialogues and see a range of perspectives and get to some sort of consensus in a way that we couldn't do before, because I can bring tens of thousands of people into those dialogues. If you want to learn more about that, Nesta in the UK, nest.a, have done some really interesting research on those collective intelligence models and different ones that work in different cultural contexts around the world. Because a collective intelligence model in India would be different to one that might work in a Kenyan cultural context or in an Argentinian one. We can't just assume we can impose a Western view in the same way as we can't just impose a view of AI ethics on the world that comes from the West, because there are different underlying philosophies and assumptions.
Yeah, it also raises the issue of...
All right, thanks. Can I here? Sorry, it's time to wind up. We need to let the last speaker have his 30 minutes as well. It's a fascinating conversation. You three of you have opened up many questions, and although there are some answers, there's clearly a lot more dialogue to be done. So thanks to all three of you, and by all means stay online, but we are going to switch over now to physical presence in this room. Thanks to the three of you.
Thank you.